Vegans get real annoyed with me when I tell them that almond milk isn't sustainable and is a horrible substitute for cow's milk. Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, I feel like I have to have this caveat here that I have no problem with veganism as an individual personal choice, but I absolutely will be critical of the way that vegan dietary choices have an outsized ecological impact that harms both Mother Nature and our communities and future generations. Exactly the same way that I am critical of omnivorous choices that are unethical, harmful, environmentally devastating. And that is absolutely the word that I would use to describe almond production. Devastating to the environment. You ever wonder why we eat so many almonds in America? It's because the almond lobby, the Almond Growers Association, I forget what the official title is of their organization, has had an incredibly effective lobbying campaign, an advertisement campaign for over a decade. I think it's probably closer to 2 decades. Here in Oregon, hazelnuts are native. They're far easier to grow, far more sustainable. They are wind pollinated. But there isn't the same powerful lobby and advertising funding for the hazelnut growers. Same for like if you live in other parts of the country where like hickory nuts or pecans are much more sustainable to grow. And unlike those hazels that are wind pollinated, almonds require bees. All of those huge monoculture food desert almond plantations in California. They not only use vast quantities of water, they're heavily sprayed. They are essentially a desert for wildlife. Nothing else is allowed to grow there. There are no wide-scale permaculture, polyculture, intercropped almond orchards that I am aware of. I'm happy to be corrected. And these massive almond orchards drive the migratory beekeeping industry. Bees are shipped in from around the country and forced to pollinate these almond orchards. When we know that honeybees, they don't actually really like almond nectar and pollen that much. They would prefer to feed on a lot of different blossoms before almonds. You're basically starving them and saying, I'm going to give you gruel, it's the only option, and you're going to eat it and you're going to like it. Migratory beekeeping is an incredibly unsustainable practice. I mean, not to mention the carbon footprint of, semi-trailers full of bees driving around the country to pollinate our crops. But also, in my opinion, as a sustainable beekeeper, it's incredibly stressful for the bees. We know that a lot of colony collapse disorder, transmission of diseases, and pests like varroa mites happens when you bring all of these colonies into really tight proximity with each other from all of these disparate locations. You end up with transmission that you wouldn't get otherwise. And again, the bees are really stressed. They're forced to eat something they don't like that isn't nutritionally what they want to have, and they're shipped around the country. So they're already stressed and more susceptible to pest and disease pressure. And this is all before we even get into the discussion of the harvesting and processing and packaging and shipping of almond milk versus the milk that our family drinks, which is of limited quantity, that comes from a local dairy here in Oregon, where I can literally drive and see the cows out on pasture. But veganism isn't really about environmentally sustainable practices, and it's not about taking a holistic view of what is ethical. It's strictly about what they view as animal rights. But in this instance, the rights and well-being of the bees are not taken into consideration, nor the vast quantities of wildlife that have been displaced by these monoculture almond orchards, nor that are killed by farm equipment. So where the animal rights part comes into play is highly subjective. Okay, a recent video I made about almond milk versus cow milk and the ecological impacts and ethics surrounding our food choices, that video kind of blew up and I wasn't expecting it. Considering a video I had made earlier in the day about veganism being ecofascism got like 500 views. The algorithm is so weird. But I'm really grateful for all of the questions and comments on that video. Because the question of food ethics, how we grow our food and why, what kinds of foods we choose to cultivate and raise and consume, and what that means for the planet, for us as eaters, for our society, for our culture, for our sustainability, for the ability of agriculture to regenerate landscapes and communities that capitalism has been exploiting and sucking dry. That's why I'm here. That's the real meaty stuff that I love to dig into, or real extra firm tofu stuff that I like to dig into. So this person says, I ask mostly for my own journey. So they're asking about ethical eating choices. Is plant-based in general more ethical, healthier? I'm still learning the ins and outs of permaculture. Yes. Okay. Great question. Not that folks can't do vegan permaculture, because they absolutely can. But you actually can't do permaculture without having animal, either wildlife or livestock involvement in your system. It's just not physically possible. But I think this is missing the point. This is the false question, the false dichotomy that folks get lured into. Is it plant-based or omnivore? Which one is better? Which one is more ethical? That's the wrong question to be asking. The question is it regenerative or is it industrial? It's not so much what we're eating as the way that it is cultivated or raised. That's where the real ethics come into play. And also the health issues, because that determines the nutritional quality of our food in ways that I think most Americans are not really cognizant of. I think a lot of concerns that vegans have about the meat industry, the dairy industry, the egg industry, is far more about industrial agriculture. And as I said in a previous video, I think we have a lot in common when it comes to humane treatment of animals. I just personally think that the animals that we are raising should live a really good, happy life. That's the reason that we raised turkeys, because I couldn't find an ethical source of turkeys that were raised with a really good, happy life. So we decided to do it ourselves. And those turkeys had a really fucking fantastic life. Every day was a good day for them until the last day of their life. They had one bad day. And I don't actually have a problem. I have made, as I said in another video, I have made peace with the fact that animals die so that my family can eat. Whether I'm eating animal products or plant products, animals have died somewhere in that process. I'm not deluded about that reality. But the question is our food being raised and grown using extractive industrial models that prioritize profit for the corporations who produce that food at the expense of workers' safety, well-being, denying fair wages, having outsized environmental impacts, and with increased cruelty to the animals that are in that system? Or can we focus on regenerative ways of cultivating our food? And that's what permaculture is about. That's what regenerative agriculture is about. And I think a lot of vegan activists are, woefully ignorant of the science of regenerative agriculture, how well documented the strategies and procedures are for pasturing your sheep for meat and fiber in a way that not only, increases tilth, enhances biodiversity, sequesters carbon, but gives the sheep a happy, good life and pays the farmer a living wage. And at the end, produces ethical products that we derive a significant amount of enjoyment from, as well as nutrition and warmth. So I think that is really the crux of the issue. It's not plant versus meat. It's regenerative versus industrial. So the Gen Z economist made a number of very forceful declarative statements on one of my videos about regenerative agriculture and the unsustainability of certain vegan practices. Framed some stuff that he made up in his head as if they were factual statements about regenerative agriculture, a subject about which he is clearly not well read and frankly quite misinformed, considering he leans into vegan propaganda. When I said that's completely false, basically you're speaking out of your ignorance, he replied, "You are also passing sweeping judgment toward vegans." No, I'm not. I'm critical of vegan activism and how it is eco-fascist in nature and upholds white supremacy. It's also ableist and classist. If you feel called out by my videos, you might want to examine why that is. Then goes on to say that vegans make up about 1% of the population and are always easy targets. Pookie, you are a privileged, college-educated white man, I presume living in America. Please stop trying to manufacture your victimhood. My criticism of vegan activism is precisely because it is an oppressive ideology. Privileged white Western folks seek to enforce their eating preferences, their beliefs onto Indigenous people, demanding that they give up their traditional food ways, abandon their culture, essentially wanting to commit cultural genocide in the name of animal rights, except it's not really about animal rights, as I have said many times over, because it's really convenient when the rights and well-being of animals are prioritized and when they're not. The inconsistency is glaring, to say the least. Vegans are not an oppressed class. Definitely white Western vegans are not an oppressed class. Stop manufacturing your victimhood. Facing valid critique because you, as you said, a very small number of people with an outsized, disproportionate amount of privilege and power are very vocally trying to get the global majority to do what you want and conform to your beliefs. Please tell me how that makes you the easy target or the victim. It makes you someone who is facing valid criticism for your harmful ideology. And also, when I point out the inconsistencies and the unsustainability of many parts of the Western vegan diet, that is not a personal attack on you. The fact that you need to center yourself in your feelings is very telling. I have no beef with folks who make a personal choice not to consume or use animal products as best they can. See what I did there? But vegan activism is eco-fascism. I will continue to vigorously speak out against it. And I will also continue to vigorously correct false, misleading, baseless claims made by vegans in my comments. Claims made entirely out of ignorance or based on vegan propaganda, misinformation, or disinformation. If you, a white American college-educated man who happens to be a vegan, gets your hackles up over my videos discussing the harm of vegan activism, the unsustainability of the movement, lack of intersectionality in the movement, if that gets your feelings all escalated, you claim that you're not a vegan activist, you're just a vegan, then I encourage you to sit with those feelings and sort through them. Why are you getting so defensive if you're not an eco-fascist? Why are you getting so defensive if you're not wanting other people to conform to your ideology? Are you getting so defensive when I point out the agricultural science that clearly disagrees with your perspective, which is based in propaganda from someone who has no experience in agriculture, much less regenerative livestock production? I think we as people have a right to eat according to our convictions, in alignment with our culture and our values. I would never try to force you to eat the way I eat. When I see vegan activists attacking my kids' friends on Twitter because they're indigenous and they've been salmon fishing, when I see vegans on social media calling indigenous folks practicing their traditional food ways carnist trash, when I see petitions being passed around Oregon by vegan advocacy groups wanting to make all hunting and fishing and all livestock production illegal in my state, including in violation of treaties between the state of Oregon, the federal government, and tribes here in Oregon, I will continue to vigorously call out that kind of eco-fascism. And if you have no problem with it, white, college-educated, Chicago American, you've got a lot of work to do. And you have no business making false claims in my comments solely rooted in your ignorance and propaganda, and you have no business telling Native people how to eat. Okay, I don't want to engage too much more with vegan activists. I get weary of them and I feel like they are an attention suck, much like tankies and accelerationists. But why is it always white men? It's always white men. Okay, don't come for this guy, but he says that being an omnivore is making animals suffer for tradition and pleasure. And I pushed back, like, that's a really weird choice of words. It's a straight PETA talking point. Like, word choice matters. And vegan activists often intentionally choose incredibly inflammatory language, which makes folks know that they're not going to engage in good faith. Like calling dairy milk grape juice without the G, or calling omnivores carnist trash. And so this choice of saying that if you eat meat, you are someone who likes to make animals suffer for your pleasure. I mean, that is certainly a choice, but also tell me that you are completely unaware of the reality that animal agriculture, domestication and cultivation of livestock is about sustainability. That livestock in a regenerative system are not purely for our pleasurable experience of eating them and the eggs and the dairy that they produce, but also that animals in that system serve a key role in enhancing biodiversity, increasing tilth, regenerating pasture, using up food waste, efficiently recycling waste products into valuable calories, reducing weed pressure, improving nitrogen in the soil through their manure. Like, tell me you know nothing about a regenerative system and how important livestock are. In permaculture, we're designing following the way that nature works. So our agricultural systems inherently must include plants, fungi, and animals because nature includes flora and fauna. But also, I won't be shamed for taking pleasure in enjoying meat and eggs and dairy. I know that I am taking a life. I know that a cow died for my family to get our full year's supply of meat. One cow. I mean, that cow fed my family and another family because we only buy half a cow. And I am at peace with that. I know that that cow lived a happy life up until its last day. It had one bad day after a full life on pasture, living happily with other cows. So I will not be shamed. And I don't think anybody else should be shamed either. Indigenous people should not be shamed for their traditional sustainable food ways or the pleasure they take in eating their traditional foods, fished or hunted. Just like I will not be shamed for taking great pleasure in supporting regenerative agriculture, local farmers, and creating delicious, nutritious food for my family.